and welcome to Stretford Paddock. It is Thursday the 14th of May 2020. We're here going to be talking about a potential loan move for Jadon Sancho. Dortmund COO Carsten Cramer, I believe his name is, which is a great name. I think we can all agree on that. Carsten Cramer, even better. Carsten Cramer has come out talking about a potential increase in loan deals this summer in reference to Jadon Sancho as well. We're also going to be looking at another youngster that United are looking to sign, this time from Celtic. It's following a trend, a recent slew of youngsters. Slew? No. A recent something of youngsters. Loads of them is what I'm trying to say. Again, this one's from Celtic. This time we'll look a little bit at him, a little bit about this story. And also, we're going to be looking at the very end. Yesterday I said I would look into how the compensation works for the likes of Jude Bellingham, why this £30 million fee is being talked about, where that figure is coming from for a player who has run out his contract, essentially. And I'll be looking at that. I've found out. I said I found out for you, so we'll get to that toward the end. But let's get into our main story today. First of all, how is everyone today? Morning, Donald. Morning, Ross. Morning, everyone. Oh, another day in paradise. Lovely weather today. I don't know what it's like where you are, but Manchester, it's one of them types of weather today. First time in a while. Carsten Cramer sounds like a cartoon character. Yeah, he does. He sounds like a sort of curmudgeonly character from, do you know those cartoons from the 70s where every German character, there was always a suspicion they were a Nazi, but they turned out to be the good guy. That kind of character. Because it took a while to get over the Second World War. Rightly so. Someone says, hi Joe, hello. Tartan line denim. Well in, mate. When does tartan become plaid? Who really knows? I certainly don't. Let's get this up on the screen then. And this, like I say in there, Sancho, loan, Carsten Cramer, great name. This is Simon Stone tweeting this, but Dortmund expect transfer fees to go down and that more players to move on loan and decisions to be taken later in the reduced transfer window. That's the key thing here. We'll come back to that. And from CAO Carsten Cramer, we want to keep our players at Dortmund as long as possible. The less clubs interested in Jadon, the less we would complain. So let's start with this loan move and fees to come down part of the story first. Again, Simon Stone, for those of you who don't know him, BBC journalist, very highly rated in terms of reliability. It's pretty safe to say if he's saying that this has happened, this has happened. So Dortmund expect transfer fees to go down. Now, and more players to move on loan as well. So I think basically what's happening there is they see that this, Dortmund are a club that are work around having assets worth as much as possible. We've seen that with Ousmane Dembele. We've seen that, obviously Sancho is another example now. We've seen it, many times down the years that Dortmund like to bring through players, sell them on. We saw it with Kago. I think they bought him for like, what was it, 400 grand from Japan? I'm not sure what country he was playing in actually, but it was around £400,000 they got Shinji Kagawa for and sold him to us for 20 odd million. That's their model, isn't it? Bring them through young. They're doing the same thing with Haaland at the moment. Get him in young and cheap. Get him playing exciting attacking football. Put him in a big league. Maybe win a trophy along the way, but recently not so much, and then sell him on. So a club like Dortmund are particularly acutely aware and will pay a particular attention to any sort of fragilities within the market, any kind of slumps are within the market. And I think this idea that United will get a cut price Jadon Sancho because the market's dropped isn't something they want to entertain. And for that reason, I think that is why they are interested in these loans. We see a lot. Loans with an option to buy, loans with an option to buy, loans with an obligation to buy you even see occasionally. Usually the loans with an obligation to buy is essentially a transfer, but usually for financial fair play reasons or just for financial reasons, the initial payments on a transfer are essentially being delayed by a year. That's usually what's happening with the obligation to buy. But we usually, we saw it with Carlos Tevez. He did a 2-year loan at United. And that was a slightly different situation because his ownership was borderline illegal. Kia Jarabchin and all that lot. There was a consortium that sort of owned him and Mascherano. That was all a different situation. But this idea of a 1 or 2 year loan with an option or obligation to buy, I think is something that would suit a team like Dortmund because they are so keen on making as much money as possible from their assets. That is how their club works. I don't think it would be the case that we just get him for a year and he goes back. Of course, anything can happen on a loan spell. If he gets 2 goals and 1 assist all season, we might not buy him. But I think the idea would be you get him on a loan, wait for the market to restabilise, wait for you get another year of proper shirt sales, another year of TV revenue to sort of top up this year, and then next year we would buy him. I assume that would be the case. You would hope that would be the case. I doubt. The one thing with a loan is if there's no obligation to buy, or if there's no option to buy, you do risk another year's worth of shop window in basically Jadon Sancho. So if we had him at United for a year with no option to buy in the contract, it's just assumed that around January, February we'll start negotiating for a full transfer in the summer. If that assumption is only an assumption, you give yourself another year of Chelsea, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich to rebuild their finances, assess their squads, and maybe come in for Jadon Sancho. That's one worry with a loan. The other worry is there's a different pressure and expectations on a loan, I think. When the player comes in, if he comes in and let's say he gets 6 goals and 6 assists, which is okay, but that's kind of Dan James numbers, isn't it? And you sort of think, well, he's not. Is it worth getting him? Whereas if you bought him and the first season, he's had a bit of a slow start, but toward the end of the season he's got 6 goals, 6 assists, you kind of think, okay, we've got something we can build on here. Sometimes the expectations are skewed, so you have to have a really great loan season for the fans to love you, for the fans to embrace you. Whereas if you're a full transfer, then people will give you that time to adapt. People will give you a slow first season because we're here for a 6-year contract. He's a young lad. We've got plenty of time for him to grow. So that's my only worry with a loan. I think from a financial perspective, it may well suit both United and Dortmund to do a loan. Let me know what you think in the comments to the idea of this potential loan situation. I think it may well suit both of us. It gives us a chance to recuperate any sort of losses over the year that may have occurred. There was talk the other day. I'm out of breath here. There was talk the other day about even if the Premier League comes back on TV, there will still be something like £300 million that will be lost from the Sky deal. So that's going to that averages out at what, 12 million quid a team, 11 million quid a team, and over a full season, that's not nothing, is it? That's probably enough for a couple of youth players. Again, we'll look in a moment about this guy from Celtic, but we're looking at 2-3 million transfers, 2-3 million here and there. That's just chipping away at the overall income of the squad. Someone saying it may well be with an option to buy. Ms. Mob saying no thanks. Glazers and Ed would love a loan and a cheap deal. Maybe a stupid question, but wasn't it for Dortmund if they loaned Sancho out? Wouldn't it just make sense just to hold on to him until clubs can afford him? Well, it might do, but also you have to take into account their relationship with United, their relationship with Sancho. We don't know what's been promised already. We don't know what's been agreed already. And if it is a loan with an obligation to buy, just to allow time for finances to come back and for a sort of a levelling out across the board in terms of transfers again, a loan with an option to buy or a loan with an obligation to buy, I think could suit them because they can sort of, plan for the future a little bit more. I understand what you mean. They're basically losing a player without making any money, but that money is essentially assumed and almost guaranteed, really, isn't it? Nice jacket, Joe. Is that new? No, it's an old one. Just haven't worn it for a while. If it's a loan with a fee up front, then an option to buy at the end of the season, it could make the most sense. Dortmund get more money overall. We get to spread the cost more. Great point. Again, we're forgetting about loan fees here as well. Or should I say, I'm overlooking the concept of loan fees. Half the time, 10, 20 million up front. And that could come off the... And also, right, okay, let's get through one point at a time. I'm too excited here. 10, 20 million up front, and then that can either work one of two ways. You either pay the loan fee to start with, and then you pay let's say it's 100 million transfer fee at the end, for a total of 120 million. Or sometimes what can happen is, you pay the loan fee up front, loan fee. Well, basically, it's the first instalment on the transfer. So you pay 20 million up front for the loan fee, and then 80 million for the full transfer, totaling 100 million. And the way that transfers work anyway it's very common for 2, 3, 4 years down the line to still be paying back instalments on transfers and on players. It's not all lump sums in the bank account of Dortmund. It takes time. These things are paid over multiple years anyway. So 20 million up front with a further 80 over the next 3 years, probably it doesn't look too dissimilar to what it would look like if we bought him outright, but it does allow us to, stagger that payment in a way that suits pretty much everyone in the current climate. Anyway, what about Gomez to Dortmund for free for a good deal for Sancho? As much as I like Angel Gomez, I'm not quite sure how much pulling power he has in terms of a £100 million Sancho deal. What would the deal be? And also, first of all, we can't control where Gomez goes. Second of all, how much of a chip is he worth in this game of poker? Really, Jadon Sancho is this giant stack, and Gomez is, he's made 10 first-team appearances for United, and I think he's a good player, but he's only a year younger than Sancho, and he isn't on his level, is he? So I'm not quite sure how much of a favourable deal that any sort of Gomez incentive would garner for us. No pun on James Garner there. Who is talking about the loan? Dortmund, it's coming from Simon Stone, so he's saying that Dortmund expect transfer fees to go down and more players to move on loan, and the decision to be taken later in a reduced transfer window. That's another thing to remember as well. This is going to be a reduced transfer window, so the time it takes to hash out all these big £100 million deals is going to be truncated most likely, so it may be more difficult to get these deals over the line. It already takes United the full transfer window to get anyone we want anyway, so now we've got an even shorter window, potentially. And again, Carsten Cramer, the CEO of Dortmund, saying, we want to keep our players at Dortmund for as long as possible. The less clubs interested in Jadon, the less we would complain. Right, let's move on to our second story today. And this one is United target Celtic youngster coming big from the Glasgow Times. Round of applause for the Glasgow Times. I think it's the first time I've reported, and we've looked at them here at Stretford Paddock. So welcome to the Paddock, Glasgow Times. Man United, Leicester and Tottenham Hotspur tracking promising Celtic youngster Daniel Kelly. Celtic fear losing yet another one of their talented teens, with Manchester United and Leicester amongst those monitoring academy starlet Daniel Kelly. The youngster, 15, let's not forget, has impressed a plethora of scouts from down south. Lovely. And further afield, having starred for the Hoops under 15s, 16s and even 18s, Kelly showcased his talents in the Sheffield Trophy, where young Celts outfit finished runners-up in the prestigious tournament to MLS side Seattle Sounders. Sorry, what? Sheffield Trophy, and they're playing against Seattle Sounders. There's a fun little 4-week trophy there. Herald and TimeSport now understand that Celtic are desperate to keep hold of the player and have offered him terms in his first pre-professional contract, but big hitters Manchester United have had him watched. That's a very Scottish turn of phrase, isn't it? They've had him watched. Kelly is a current student at St Ninian's High School programme, which has helped produce the likes of Kieran Tierney, Mickey Johnston and Anthony Ralston, among others at Parkhead. It comes a short time after Liam Morrison departed Glasgow for Bayern Munich, and his understood fellow kid Barry Hepburn will follow the 17-year-old to Germany. Again, Chelsea, Arsenal and Tottenham are also keeping tabs on the box-to-box midfielder. Not really a lot to say on this one. Like most of you, I don't particularly know the quality of this 15-year-old who plays for Celtic, but again, what is nice to look at is this continued tradition. Again, it's been a tradition for a long time, but it's nice to see it flourishing in recent weeks of signing these promising youngsters from around Europe and from around Britain as well. But yeah, Daniel Kelly there, looking as though it's one of those ones. It doesn't seem as concrete as the information we've been seeing on the lad from Sunderland and the fullback from Barcelona that we talked about yesterday. But again, it does seem as though he's the sort of person that United are watching, and it's amazing, really, isn't it? I know it can't be that difficult a job going around and checking everyone, but it must be a fun job being a scout and going to Scotland and going to Barcelona and going to all these countries and just watching, youth football. But it's amazing that a club like United and pretty much every club in the Premier League just have their fingers in every pie in Europe, don't they? And every pie around the world as well. So no stone left unturned. Admittedly, not too much of a distant stone in this case of it being within Britain. But again, maybe a name to look out for there. Daniel Kelly, one that we'll probably be talking about a little bit more if this deal does go through. So Ross Murphy says brilliant talent. Interesting. Oh, are you talking about Sancho or Daniel Kelly there? Because surely no one knows about Daniel Kelly. Speaking of brilliant talents, though, let's just have a look at this one then, because yesterday we were talking about Jude Bellingham and this sort of reported and rumoured 20 to 30 million pound compensation fee for a player that's leaving on a free transfer. And as we know, when Ander Herrera, for example, left to PSG, we weren't paid any compensation. So I didn't know at the time exactly why we would have to pay compensation and why it's such a vast amount. 30 million is, I wouldn't have thought we'd be paying much more than that if he had 3 years left on his contract. 30 million for a 16-year-old is, literally Wayne Rooney money. So I'm surprised that it was so expensive. And I wanted to know why, and I didn't know why, but I found out why. So here we go. This is from fullcontactlaw.co.uk. Compensation for players under 24. So first of all, there's a clarification. It has to be players under 24. As clubs begin their recruitment drive for next season, I'm increasingly asked, and this is written by someone called Dan Chapman, whether in respect of players that we act for. So this guy, I believe, is a football lawyer. How the compensation system works, where a professional player under the age of 24 has been offered a new contract by a club and he rejects that offer in order to take up an opportunity to sign for another club, compensation will be payable. So this process is operated by the Professional Football Compensation Committee, and I've read through this already once, but I'll go through the sort of the main notes of it. The PFCC is incorporated under the rules of both the Football League and the Premier League, and forms part of the collective bargaining agreement with the Professional Footballers Association. Essentially what happens is there are hearings ran by the PFCC, again the Professional Footballers Compensation Committee. These hearings are ran where both teams provide evidence to support their valuation of the player in question. In making its judgment, the committee will take into account the costs of both clubs in operating a football academy or centre of excellence, as well as the age and playing record of the player. The length of time he was registered at his original club, the terms offered by both clubs, the status of the two clubs, the substantiated interest shown by other clubs in acquiring the registration of the player, and any amounts paid by the original club to acquire the player in the first place. So let's look at that in context of Bellingham. First of all, you've got how much is this lad worth if he was under contract? How much is he worth? And presumably being one of the sort of most highly rated 16-year-olds on the planet, pretty highly. Then you have to look at the length of time he was at his original club. I don't know how long he's been at Birmingham for, but I think he's from Birmingham, so I think it's been a while. Then you have to look at the substantiated interest shown by other clubs in acquiring the registration of the player. Now, this is interesting to me because until I heard that, I was always kind of thought he's gone to Dortmund, he's gone to United. There was talks of him going to Chelsea. I've heard Arsenal being interested, City being interested as well. Now you wonder, don't you, whether is there a chance that this touting of him around Europe is to increase a potential compensation fee that any club could get due to the substantiated interest shown by other clubs. I'm not accusing anyone of doing that sort of thing, but I'm sure it's happened in the past where, hang on a sec, if we make this player look like everyone in Europe wants him, we will get more money in compensation when he eventually does go somewhere. Again, I'm not saying that that's happening in this case, but it's an interesting part of the guidelines that have to be looked at when these sorts of compensations are given out. Unlike FIFA's formulaic approach, which provides foreign clubs with a fixed tariff for compensation, the domestic process, so the process in England, is said to provide the advantage of allowing greater flexibility in setting a level of compensation according to the merits of each individual case. The counter to that is that unlike with the FIFA tariff, there is always inherent uncertainty, and this, in my experience, can work against players, particularly lower down in the Football League, where clubs often feel like they cannot afford to carry that risk of uncertainty, or they simply feel like signing of a player governed by the PFCC regime is too complex. Now that's talking about players in teams in lower leagues signing these players, whereas this is Manchester United trying to sign this player. Now, here's another point. In deciding a compensation figure, it's not uncommon for the PFCC to set fees that build as the player becomes more established at first team level. So here's the thing as well. People are talking about this 30 million fee. Now, this could include 5 years down the line when he's played for us, when he's scored a few goals. We have those incentives, those sort of. I think we've got some in place for Bruno Fernandes at the moment, where if he gets the Ballon d'Or, he gets another. Sporting get another 10 million, etc. It almost seems as though those sorts of incentives and clauses can be put into a compensation contract, which is interesting to me because I'm surprised that you think once it's done, but apparently not. It's now become quite usual for clubs to receive a basic compensation fee, with further payments becoming due on the player's debut, following a certain number of first-team appearances, and after international appearances. It is also usual for there to be a sell-on fee should the player be sold at profit at any time in the future. So this huge £30 million fee is probably a prediction that encompasses certain characteristics and clauses being met that may be very much unlikely. So I think this £30 million figure, as newspapers like to do, may be a maximum that we would ever possibly pay for Bellingham, rather than here's 30 million up front and we'll see you later. It's probably more likely to be 10 or 15 million because he's come through, he's played a lot of first team games for a lad of his age. He's clearly being touted by a lot of clubs around Europe. He's clearly a very talented and exciting young player. But I think probably a few million at least of this reported 30 million are from unlikely, or anywhere from likely to unlikely performance-related clauses as well. So that's an interesting point. Interest from other clubs, multiplier times time spent at other clubs, plus market value for player, minus average weekly wages equals compensation fee. Well, I believe that may be the FIFA way of doing things, but again, as we're being told here by this football lawyer, unlike FIFA's formulaic approach, which I believe is what you have commented in there, or something similar to that, the PFCC, which is the way that it's done in England, is more of a case-by-case basis, taking those factors into account on a more kind of conversational and movable basis, rather than it being quite as formulaic as you've laid out there. Let's look quickly, just before we go, at an example of this. For anyone who's not quite getting it, Aaron Cresswell. Aaron Cresswell had made 70 or so league appearances for Tranmere when he aged 21, rejected a new deal. He signed for Championship club Ipswich Town on a 3-year contract. The PFCC decided that Ipswich should pay Tranmere an initial $240,000. An additional $45,000 was ordered in respect to the player making 15, 30, 45 and 60 appearances for Ipswich Town. An additional $100,000 should Ipswich Town achieve promotion to the Premier League in the next 3 seasons. And Tranmere are to receive a 20% profit made, 20% of any profit made by Ipswich Town in selling the player to another club in the future. So we may see some interesting clauses in any potential Bellingham deal. And also, something else to take into account here is that Dortmund will be operating under the FIFA more formulaic way of paying compensation. So there's definitely an idea that Birmingham, I know they don't have say over where he goes if he's a free transfer, but Birmingham may have a preference into where he goes, because I'm not quite sure on the sort of history of the FIFA way of doing things and the PFCC domestic way of doing things, which tends to get more money. But Birmingham may well prefer him to go to United because they may get more compensation from something like that. Anyway, hope that wasn't too sort of dense and boring at the end there. I just thought we keep seeing this £20-30 million compensation fee being touted about for Jude Bellingham, like we all know where that comes from. So thought, let's clear that up. Let's find out exactly why it's going to cost us 30 million, and if it will cost us 30 million. From my workings out and from what I understand, I would say 30 million is a maximum, or somewhere around that fee would be based on him coming to the club and then achieving quite a lot of things at the club, as well as just signing over in the summer. So interesting. Realistically, compensation would be less than the fees that have been spoken about him, sure. There's people in the comments talk about memberships there. If you want to become a member, click the join button next to the subscribe button under the video. You get access to, we've got a members only podcast. We've also, you get to play FIFA with us if you're in the Legends tier. We've also got all sorts of behind the scenes videos. We've got another behind the scenes video coming out this week. So make sure you check that out as well. And for the rest of the day, we've got a podcast coming at 4 o'clock with Stephen Howson. That should be very good. And also, if you want to get in the comments, ask any questions about this Sancho deal, anything about the compensation stuff, we'll get to those in the comments as well. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you have a great day. It's a lovely sunny day. Get out and have a walk. Have 2 walks. You can have 2 walks now. 2, 3 walks, how many walks you want? How many walks do we have to pretend that we do now that the guidelines have been slightly altered? I was struggling to pretend I was walking once a day. Who am I going to convince that I'm walking twice a day? Probably no one. Right, thank you very much for joining me. Again, 4 o'clock for the Paddock podcast, so make sure you tune in for that. We'll see you next time.